So welcome back, and please join me in welcoming our next panel. We have Vincent, Stephen, Mohamed, and David. So please welcome these gentlemen to the stage. So as you can see, this panel is talking about how security as a business function, how can investments in technology and metrics align security efforts with business objectives. So overall, how can we demonstrate that security is an enabler to the business and not just a cost centre? So let's kick this off, Stephen. Stephen's from Axis. What actionable data can technology provide beyond security? For example, how do we leverage our investment in CCTV cameras beyond just security?
Thanks, John. Yes, so if we look at how we evaluate technology today, people will traditionally look at their video surveillance system and they will look at the picture resolution, they'll look at how it integrates with their other security systems. If we look at where we are today now, and if we see this as a sensor and we look at the data that this system can collect, it's called metadata, we start to attach object information to everything that we see in a scene. So we can start to align that to our sustainability teams, we can look at business intelligence, business optimization. Whatever function that we have within an organization, the security systems can provide actionable intelligence to other departments. And that's there today, but we just don't leverage that information. So given the opportunity, we can start to tag and demonstrate a return on investment to the wider business, and we can get additional stakeholders within an organization to start to invest in security technologies that may help you meet your corporate social responsibility, legal and governance, compliance, all of these different areas. And that is there today within a traditional video surveillance system, just utilizing metadata more efficiently.
So when we start talking about megadata, Stephen, what are the sorts of things that are most readily available to us?
Okay, so if we look at where we are in an environment today, we've got hundreds of people. The system today can quite easily look at the occupancy levels. We can start to analyse the trends within the data that's being captured, and we can look at how we can look at maybe resourcing personnel in a different way. We can use the video surveillance system to control your HVAC systems that will bring down your energy consumption within a building. We can turn off the lights, turn on lights. We can look at the optimization of room modeling. So we find that a lot of offices may accommodate 10,000 people, but the reality is we may only have 4,000 or 5,000 people in an office at any one time. The video surveillance systems are capturing that data today already. And if we can use that data efficiently to influence how businesses are run, these are things that can be realized today if deployed correctly.
Thanks, Steve. And Vincent, you're with Seagate, which really is all about data and how we store it and how we access it. So what are the implications for this data storage as we move into these whole megadata realms, and we're collecting so much data?
Yep, a good question. I think up until recently, data storage was sort of a necessity, right? It was a necessary evil, almost a recording mechanism. And after 30 days, you might decide to discard of the data and reuse your data storage capacity for the coming month. Nowadays, especially with the introduction of AI, there is a lot of value to pull from the data. So very much in line with what Stephen just mentioned, we see a completely new era where we help businesses to optimize the processes and also to achieve their business objectives. So think for example about a store, a normal CCTV environment, with data storage, you keep the data for 30 days, that's all great. But now, with AI, you can analyze all the data. You can look at how people walk through your store. You can analyze which parts of the store are more often visited than others. And you can optimize your product placement in that sense. So data storage is only only a part of it, a small part of a bigger security environment. But we're really adding now more value to the business objectives of companies.
Thanks, you. And David, what are your thoughts around this?
When we talk about data, we have to talk about categorization and classification, right? We need to know what it is that we want to store and how to protect and how to maintain that data through classification. Is this sensitive? This is important, right? Once you have those two things done, you now know how long to store it for, what its use cases are for business intelligence, for other areas, and you know how to protect it. What level of protection does this piece of data need, right? What are my recovery options for that? What are my security options around protecting that piece of data? For example, if we look at facial recognition, everyone's concerned about the PII, right, or the privacy around that. Well, most cameras don't actually record your face. They vectorize it and restore that vector. That vector has value today, tomorrow, and 20 years from now. It never changes. So that's highly sensitive data, yet it's usable data over and over and over again. So we want to categorize it correctly, and we want to classify it correctly so the AI models can continue to learn, whether it be object recognition, like he was mentioning about tagging, right? Whether that be a bag, a weapon, a fire, all of these things can be tagged, stored, and used over and over again as long as we know that we should keep it and why we're keeping it.
So just to clarify, when you talk about a vector as opposed to a face, can you explain to the audience how it captures a vector?
So what it does is it draws a grid over the object and then maps the grid via geometry. And then that creates a 3D model, and that 3D model is stored mathematically. And so now it can build that model over and over and over and over again, indefinite amount of times without any degradation, right? Because depending on the quality of the camera will depend on what the facial looks like. Like if you look at Microsoft Hello, right? It's not using camera, it's using infrared. It's using IR to scan the features to determine if that's the same vector that it had before. It also uses that to determine, is this a photograph or a real face, right? The IR is doing heat sensitive, right? And that's the same thing that cameras can do, particularly access points, right? If your camera doesn't have the ability to determine on a door if it's a photo or a mask held up, or is that a person, right? So you start to see more of that stuff in, much like you mentioned about environmental controls, having environmental sensors, whether it be flare or something like that, they can say there's a hot spot over there, or there's a cold spot over here, and then watch where people migrate between that. All of that's mathematically stored as vectors.
Thank you so much. So Mohamed, from Sierra's perspective, and I know you're looking at AI and ChatGPT, and what are your thoughts on where these technologies going?
Well, AI is a game changer. It changed a lot of things, as you see, adding to that. If we like to, as you know, one of the Sierra requirement now to store, the minimum requirement for storage for a camera is 30 days. But what happened if we decide to increase that to 1 year? Do we need to increase our storage? Do we have to change our infrastructures? That's a lot of investment. But with using an AI now, adding to the David, now we classify all this information. Now we can tell, okay, with AI, you can classify and categorize this information, and you can keep that information for that bit. So within using now large language models, or as you know, like most use like ChatGPT, we can convert these images to the useful information. Most of us, we know that one picture worth 1,000 words, but how we can generate that from the video images or from the video camera. So with using a ChatGPT or large language model, we can generate useful information, and we can understand what is going on with that footage, and we can categorize that information, and we know what to store from that footage. I think now with the using AI, it will change a lot of how we are restoring the data and what data we have to keep. And
well, thank you very much, Mohamed. So, David, when we talk about using AI in our security industry, what are some of the examples we could be applying?
So whether we're talking AI as in like natural language processing or natural visualization processing. So we use the camera example, right? The AI can identify that user walked in, left an object and left without that object, right? From a physical security point of view, that should be an automatic trigger to have that object investigated. Was that object left in a book return, right? Then maybe there's a whitelist around that. Was that object tucked under a table, right? All of these things, the AI can make conclusions, right? Its hypothesis engine's always running and saying, oh, the object identified as a book, it went into the book return slot. I don't need to have a threat case for that. Or the object is a box or a bag and it was tucked under a table. My threat case is X for this. Do Y and right and move forward in those areas. When we look at AI in a natural language processing, it's about reading intent and context of things, right? This person has posted something on the internet that has a negative content that either has hurtful or potential threatening indications. Flag that, bring that forward. That's where AI from a security perspective is used most commonly, right? Is about creating these hypotheses to run through either visual data or written data or even sound data, right? Recording conversations, right? Recording the room, and then listening for things that it can detect, right? And then identifying that through a model that's been trained on different sounds, right? And then from there, create threat models around that to introduce things, right? And that's the big areas that they're used today in a physical security world.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Vincent, do you have some comments on that?
Yeah, I think an AI without data can't really add any value, right? So from a data storage perspective, it's very interesting to see that up until recently, all businesses, and this is not just about security, right? This is not just about recording videos. It's about all data. We only keep altogether 10% of the data we create. So 90% of the data we just basically, well, put to the bin. It's very important for businesses to record and keep more data. Because if you want your AI solutions to help you to monetize that data and learn from it and optimize your processes, store your data. So in one sense, and you made a good comment, right? Storage is a cost, but it's also at the same time, it's an investment to monetize and actually make money because you're learning more of whatever you are storing and analyzing. So that's the comment I wanted to make.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Steve, at the end there, you know, how do we use all this data for our business to sort of drive the business objectives?
So I just want to touch back on one of the earlier points. Obviously, we're talking around AI. I think as an industry, we need to manage expectations. AI does feel like a buzzword. We're all jumping on the bandwagon. On one of the earlier panels, we highlighted the EU AI Act, and that is going to massively influence the way technology is. I guess the learning algorithms are trained within the technology. They've got to be used within ethical databases, because if you've got a business entity that operates here in Europe, in the US, they all have to comply with the EU AI Act. And we're talking hundreds of millions potentially in fines for organizations that don't comply with this. Where we see it impacting the way businesses will benefit from this is because the large language models that we've spoken around, we are talking around billions of objects now that technology companies can train their technology against. So the efficiency and the ability of this technology is significantly greater than it has ever been before. Now, we don't necessarily know how a business will use that data. We are probably limited by our own creativity. But what we do know is that we can tag a lot of new information and share it with lots of other stakeholders within a business. And when we do, we focus on sustainability. We talk, business optimization, compliance, all of those different things. It's because rather than storing video, which is incredibly expensive, when we are just storing data, mathematical data, we can retain that information for as long as we need. And the storage requirements are so small, so not ideal for Seagate that are trying to sell loads of big storage drives, but great for people that are trying to sell other aspects of how we operate and how we use that intelligence.
So thanks, Steve. So Mohamed, when we look at technology and advances and we start to look into drones and robotics, I'd be really interested to sort of see what your thoughts are on how we could be applying some of this technology for a business objective.
Now, it's using the AIs. I think it's a lot of change, and as you see now, it's using only the camera itself or footage is not only enough information to train our AI models, but now that we can use images or video plus sound or voice, so it can train our models more. We can understand the video or what's going on more, so we can get more information of utilizing that. So now we're using that models. I think we're getting more information, and instead of just storing that data, we have more information about the video or what's going on in that. Adding to that, now there is a lot of research going on how to utilize advanced technology like robotics and drones to so in the case of there is a disaster, so there's an area without any infrastructures, how we can utilize the drones or robotics to have that coverage or improve the security in that area. I think there's a lot of demand and research now. How can keep the drones available and demand, or there is a case of instant requirements for it.
Thank you.
I think with drones, governments have a bit better ability to use them than, say, commercial worlds. Some areas that you can use it for are obviously perimeter security, but parking lot flow control, right? Having aerial footage of how people enter and exit your facility, whether it be a parking lot structure, a parking garage, or even access roads, you can determine what the easiest path is and what flows better, not only from a safety standpoint, but from an economy standpoint, right? From sustainability, right? If the road was built one way, that takes people longer to get, or it's like you see in colleges with quads. There's always that path that's cut through it that people walk on versus walking on the nice paved areas, right? That's using the environment to show you that. And drones, I think, from that point of view, can be very helpful for that, depending on if you're allowed via regulations to operate them in those spaces. So that's where the government has kind of an advantage. And I think the UAE does that for traffic flow on much of the highways and stuff as well.
So I'd be interested in the panel's thoughts about when we look at how much data that we store, when we have a disruption to a business and we need to get the business back on track. What are your thoughts on how much data we need to return to a point, or how are we going to recover it? Steve, do you have any thoughts about that?
Really glad that you picked me for that challenging question. Thanks, John. I guess if we look at the sort of the business continuity aspect of how we look at data recovery, some businesses will say, if we're looking at just the information to bring systems back up, if we look at that from a cybersecurity point of view, that's where we see a lot of systems taken down. You'd like to say they're getting back to sort of 80, 90% of the recovered data in order for businesses to get back to business as usual. But it will be different in different areas of an organisation. I guess the marketing function will be different from the HR function, which will be different from the security. So there probably aren't necessarily the same synergies there. And how long it takes a business to recover data will impact how quickly they get back to business as usual. We've seen it firsthand where some businesses never recover because they have no backups and they don't have the ability to recover information. We've seen others that can recover in days and get back to business as usual.
Thanks, Steve. Now, David, perhaps you can expand upon that and maybe explain the 3-2-1 rule.
Yeah. So when we look at recovery, we're looking at the 3-2-1-2 is have 3 copies of your data in 2 different places, and 1 place being off-site, right? That's traditional, old-school reliability, right? It works almost all the time, as long as you exercise those backups frequently to make sure that it is doing what it's supposed to be doing, it is capturing. Going back to earlier, right, if you categorize and classify your data, and part of that process is disaster recovery and continuity. You know exactly what to store. Are you going to store it on warm or cold storage or hot storage, like NASs and arrays that Seagate can put out there, and you have this data in a protected vault sitting there for instant recovery, assuming the building doesn't burn down. And then if the building does burn down, that is backed up or cloned to an off-site facility, again, using vault technology or what we call worm. Write once, read many, right? So where we're sending the data where it cannot be manipulated, and then we can recover it infinite amount of times, right? And we can do that directly off disk for high speed, or we can do it off tape, or we can send it somewhere. Modern hard drives today have a shelf life of 20 years, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Before they had a shelf life of 10, 15, right? So that wasn't an option. Now they have magnetic shielding. They have things where you can record them to cheap, long-term storage that's fast, put it in a safe somewhere, and recover it when you need it.
Fantastic. Now, what I'd like to also just remind the audience is we have a couple of floating microphones around. So if you do have any questions for the panel, please just raise your hand and we'll get the microphone over to you. Is there any questions at this stage before we keep going? No? Great. Well, I'll ask another question in a moment to the panel, but if you do have a question, just raise your hand and one of the staff will bring a microphone over to you. So, Mohamed, do you think that this region is going to continue leading the field in things like drones and robotics, and how are we going to apply that for more than just security?
Robotics, if you look at it nowadays, it's almost we are using it daily life.
Okay.
When you fly an aircraft now, the autopilot take control. If you go now using autonomous cars, like it's the autopilot take control. We using robotics more than before, and I think now we are going to use robotics in our daily life. We're going to use drones for not only for security, but we can also use for delivery. We can now we are using a drone, like there is using a drone, like for example in Africa where there is no infrastructure for this, so they use it to deliver medicines and they are using drones now where there is a lot of traffic to deliver some items and things. So there is a lot of investments and using the drones. And also there is also research and like using a camera and things to have taking more information, just storing that information. How we can utilize that information, how we can get benefit of that information which we have it in our storage. How we can analyze it and we get something useful for our future requirements, or even we can use it for training our modules for recognizing an object or detecting some threats or anything like that.
Thank you. And I'd just like to sort of start to wrap up with the panel around and get some final thoughts on where are we going in the future to look at technology and metrics, and how we can use some of the security metrics to help enable business opportunities. David, would you like to start off around that?
From a metric standpoint, everything can be turned into a metric, right? Whether it be flows for the door, tickets generated for service, help desks, right? And knowing that allows you from particularly a staffing perspective, right? Can I automate that? Do I need a human to do that? Can I use robotics? Can I use some other tool to take and reduce the amount of effort and the amount of workload that's necessary, right? And so metrics comes into point from that, but you can also use it for loss leads, profit and loss, different areas like that. Metrics come in very heavily as well to determine from a cost perspective, but it also helps to identify when humans are doing things wrong, right? We can isolate whether it be a group, individual, or even a department, and whether that's training, culture, or personality, metrics can identify where those problems are from a security point of view, right? There's one person in one department that's always clicking that email, and that's always trying to sell them some form of something to get better in their life, and then the next thing you know, malware, right? That's metrically driven data that you can identify that individual person for corrective action, or that department that keeps doing it, because maybe their business model is that they need to open every email and look at it because they're in marketing or sales leads or something like that. So identifying all that through metrics allows you to pinpoint problems and react faster to them.
Thank you, David. Vincent, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm obviously focused on data storage, right? And I think the most important thing for us is use the tools that we have when it comes to AI to put your data to work. That is really one of the key points that we focus on. And yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
Thanks, Vincent. And Steve, your final thoughts on metrics and business objectives?
So I think every business is going to have goals and objectives aligned to like compliance aspects, sustainability, corporate social responsibility, all of those things. We will absolutely see that information captured in security technologies today, and it's just making sure that we can drag that information out and provide that to additional stakeholders within an organisation, and it can be measured. Every business knows what their ongoing electricity or power consumption costs are. If you can use your security system to reduce those costs, easy to measure. Legal and compliance, health and safety, very straightforward.
Thank you, Steve. Is there any questions from the audience before we move on? I don't see any. Oh, there's one over here. Mike, yeah, can someone run a microphone over to Mike? Oh, well, there's a microphone coming. I know you've got a loud voice, but it's fine.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, I was thinking, with the EU AI Act, AI for good, AI for bad, and, obviously we're trying to regulate AI for ethical usage within the business, but as we know, threat actors are also leverage AI. So do we think in the future things like the regulation that's coming from the EU are going to lead to putting business at a disadvantage versus the threat actor who's not going to adhere to any sort of regulation around the use of AI? I'm just curious what the panel's thoughts on that are.
Absolutely. We see that today, right? We see that right now. You can ask ChatGPT to help you write a script to look for bad, and it tells you, no, I can't do that because you want me to do something that's bad. Yet I can go on the dark web and use ChatGPT and have it write the exact code that I can ruin an organization in 30 seconds. But the good ChatGPT won't write me code to detect that bad code because of its morality clause that's put into place. Regulations and laws only empower criminals to be more criminally minded, right? They hamper, in most cases, organizations from achieving innovation and goals. And maybe that's a good reason, right? Maybe there are things that could be far stretched, but at the end of the day, the criminals will always have that advantage because we will always have a hard wall.
So I'll add, so I've been fortunate enough to represent ASIS within the steering groups that will look at how the EU AI legislation has been written and what we see from a technology point of view. So I would say the deployment hasn't been there to hinder the way businesses will utilize it. It's looking at the ethical behavior in the way that systems are being trained. So we need to be mindful that we need to protect human rights, we need to protect people's privacy, and actually where are these databases coming from? How are these databases being developed for technology providers to write their solutions towards it? That's what the legislation is being provided for. It is there to protect sort of people's privacy, be mindful of the protection of human rights and make sure that certain ethnicity groups, certain types of demographics of people aren't being exploited in the way the technology is being written. We absolutely do see the bad actors utilising AI. We see organisations utilising AI, but I think the regulation that sits behind it is something that will be separate from that.
Thank you, Stephen. Any further comments from the audience? Questions? No, fantastic. If you could join me in putting our hands together and thanking our panel.